Imagine an ancient human. What do you see? Probably an image from a movie. A stooped, hairy man with a heavy jaw and a vacant stare. His skin is dark, and his movements are clumsy. This image has been shaped by cinema and popular culture. However, the reality was much more complex. We will look at what people of that era looked like, based on modern scientific data rather than the fantasies of artists. We will talk about how facial features, body structure, and even skin color change depending on climate and habitat. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn why the idea of primitive society as a primitive and homogeneous group is one of the greatest misconceptions. We are used to thinking of Neanderthals as our distant and primitive relatives. However, their appearance was much more complex. Neanderthals, who lived in Eurasia, had a number of unique features that distinguished them from Homo sapiens. Their skulls were more elongated, with a low forehead and prominent brow ridges. Their chins were slanted, and their jaws were massive. This was due to the fact that they had to chew tough food, including raw meat and roots. Their physique was stocky and squat. A broad chest, short limbs, and powerful muscles helped them survive the harsh conditions of the Ice Age. Their appearance was an adaptation to the cold climate. For example, their wide noses helped warm the cold air they breathed. Neanderthals were stronger than Homo sapiens, but not as resilient. Their appearance reflected their way of life. Despite their external similarities to us, Neanderthals had significant differences. Their skulls were longer and lower, and their brains were slightly different in shape. This did not mean that they were less intelligent, just that their thinking was probably organized differently. For example, it is believed that they had more developed visual perception. Massive brow ridges and a large nose were also features that distinguished them from sapiens. Their appearance was ideal for survival in the cold. Short limbs and a broad body reduced the surface area of the body, which helped to retain heat. It was a kind of natural thermoregulator. Powerful muscles were necessary not only for hunting, but also for survival in harsh conditions. They had to carry heavy loads, move across rough terrain, and defend themselves from predators. Their bodies were tools for survival. Modern research shows that Neanderthals were very resilient creatures. They could withstand extreme cold, hunger, and injuries that would be fatal to us. Their appearance was a reflection of their strength and endurance. They were not primitive, but a unique species that was able to adapt to the harshest conditions. Now think about which of these Neanderthal characteristics you think would be most useful for survival in the modern world. A powerful physique or the ability to chew tough food? Share your thoughts in the comments. Homo erectus, or upright man, was one of the most successful species of ancient humans. They were the first to leave Africa and spread throughout Eurasia. Their appearance was intermediate between early hominids and modern humans. They had a taller skull than their ancestors, but still had prominent brow ridges and a sloping forehead. Their jaw was less massive, suggesting that they already used tools to process food. Homo erectus had longer limbs and were taller, making them better suited to long journeys and survival in open landscapes. They were the first to use fire. This allowed them not only to keep warm, but also to cook food, which influenced their appearance. Cooked food was softer, so their jaws became less massive over time. The use of fire was a key moment in the evolution of Homo erectus. Fire not only provided heat and light, but also helped scare away predators. In addition, cooked food was easier to digest, which allowed the body to spend less energy on digestion. This energy, in turn, could be directed toward brain development. It was from this point on that the rapid increase in brain size in ancient humans began. Another important feature was their physique. Homo erectus had longer limbs, which made them more resilient. This allowed them to travel long distances in search of food. Their appearance was ideal for life on open plains and steppes. They were fast and agile, which helped them hunt large animals. Homo erectus were the first to build primitive dwellings. These were huts made of branches and skins that protected them from the elements. Building dwellings was a sign of advanced intelligence and social organization. They lived in groups, which helped them survive in harsh conditions. But imagine that, along with fire, they began to conquer not only space but also the climate. This led to the most unexpected changes in their appearance. What were they? Let's talk about that next. The skin color of ancient humans was most likely dark. This is because Homo sapiens originated in Africa, where the dark pigment melanin protected them from the scorching sun. As they spread around the world and adapted to different climatic conditions, their skin color began to change. In northern latitudes where there was less sunlight, the skin became lighter in order to get more vitamin D. This process took place over tens of thousands of years. Hair color and texture were also likely to have varied. Like modern humans, the ancient inhabitants of Earth had different hair shades, ranging from dark to light and straight to curly. These characteristics were the result of genetic adaptations and migrations. The idea that all ancient humans were dark-skinned and curly-haired is a simplification. In reality, they looked as diverse as we do today. The evolutionary factors influencing skin color were complex and multifaceted. Initially, dark skin was vital for survival in conditions of strong ultraviolet radiation. High concentrations of melanin prevented the destruction of folic acid in the body, which was critical for reproductive health. However, when people began to migrate to more northern regions, they faced a new problem: a lack of sunlight. In these conditions, light skin was an advantage, as it allowed the body to synthesize the necessary amount of vitamin D, which is important for bone health. People with lighter skin in northern latitudes got more vitamin D and, as a result, had a better chance of surviving. It was a long and gradual process of adaptation that happened over many generations. Hair structure and color were also the result of adaptation to the environment. In regions with hot and humid climates, curly hair was more common as it created an air layer that protected the head from overheating. In colder regions, straight hair may have helped to retain heat better. Hair color, in turn, may have been linked to genetic drift and mutations that did not always have a direct adaptive significance, but became fixed in the population over time. Thus, the appearance of ancient humans was not random, but the result of a complex interaction between genetics, climate, and lifestyle. They were not a homogeneous mass, but represented a multitude of different groups with unique traits that helped them survive in a wide variety of conditions. From the dark skin of African sapiens to the light skin of European hunters, every appearance was perfect for its environment. It was a world where diversity was the key to survival. Modern scientific research, particularly the analysis of ancient DNA, allows us to reconstruct these features with remarkable accuracy. We can learn not only skin and hair color, but also other details that would be invisible when studying skeletons. This helps us dispel myths created by cinema and see ancient humans as they really were: complex, diverse, and unique. The body proportions of ancient people differed from ours. For example, Neanderthals had short shins and forearms, while early Homo sapiens, on the contrary, had long limbs. This was due to the fact that Neanderthals were adapted to a cold climate, while Homo sapiens were adapted to a hot climate. Short limbs helped to retain heat, while long limbs helped to release it. The structure of the skeleton was also different. Neanderthals had more massive bones that could withstand heavy loads. Their physique was more muscular, which helped them in hunting and other physical activities. Homo sapiens had a lighter and more graceful skeleton. This made them more resilient and allowed them to cover long distances. The differences in physique were a direct result of adaptation to the environment. Neanderthals, who lived in cold Eurasia, developed a compact and stocky body. Their short limbs and broad chest minimized the surface area of their bodies, which reduced heat loss. It was an ideal biological stove, capable of withstanding severe frosts. This anatomy, based on the principle of heat conservation, allowed them to conserve energy in conditions of limited resources. On the other hand, early Homo sapiens who migrated from Africa to warmer regions developed a taller and more slender physique. Their long limbs, on the contrary, increased their body surface area. This helped them release excess heat, which was important for survival in hot climates. This body structure was also more efficient for long-distance running, which was critical for hunting large game. Muscle mass and bone density also indicated different lifestyles. Neanderthals were incredibly strong. Their bones were dense and their muscle attachments were massive, indicating constant and heavy physical exertion. They probably hunted by engaging in close combat with large animals. On the other hand, the skeleton of Homo sapiens was lighter, indicating less strength but greater agility. Their muscles were longer and more elongated, which allowed them to be more enduring. Even the structure of their feet and hands was different. Neanderthals had broad, flat hands, adapted for grasping and holding heavy objects. Homo sapiens had more delicate hands, which allowed them to create more complex tools and weapons. Neanderthals' feet were wide and flat, which helped them move across uneven terrain, while Homo sapiens' feet were more arched and flexible, which was ideal for long-distance running. These anatomical differences were not just a coincidence, but the result of millions of years of evolution. Each species chose its own survival strategy. Neanderthals chose strength, while Homo sapiens chose endurance and intelligence. In the end, both strategies were successful, but in different conditions. Today, by studying their bones, we can not only reconstruct their appearance, but also understand how they lived, hunted, and interacted with their environment. All these anatomical features were directly related to their way of life and survival. Their ability to pass on their genes to the next generation depended on how they moved, how they hunted, and how they protected themselves from the cold. Each difference was the result of nature's long and painstaking work, which chose the best solutions for each specific situation. Now let's imagine that you find yourself in the Ice Age and you have to choose: take warm clothes with you or just become a Neanderthal? Let's discuss what ancient people actually wore to survive. Clothing was an important element of survival in the ancient world. People used animal skins to protect themselves from the cold and wind. They learned to tan skins, making them soft and durable. Bone needles and animal tendons were used as thread for sewing. Clothing was not just protection, but an important element of culture. Ancient people decorated it using natural dyes and beads made from shells and bones. Clothing varied depending on the climate. In cold regions, it was multi-layered, consisting of several skins. In warmer regions, it was lighter and consisted of one or two skins. Clothing was not only functional, but also symbolized a person's social status. The process of making clothes was laborious and required special skills. First, the animal's skin was removed and thoroughly cleaned of fat and meat residues. Then it was stretched on a wooden frame and processed. Various methods were used to tan the skins: smoking, treatment with animal fat or brains, and vegetable tanning agents. This made the skin soft and waterproof. After that, it was cut into pieces of the desired shape and sewn together with bone needles and tendons. The clothing of ancient people was simple in form but effective. Most often, it consisted of capes, tunics, and pants sewn from several pieces of skin. They did not have complex patterns but provided good protection from the cold and wind. In cold regions, clothing was made from skins with fur, and in warm regions, from thin skins. In addition to skins, ancient people used other materials. In regions where there were no large animals, they could use fish skins, bird feathers, and even plant fibers. They learned to weave ropes and threads from nettles, flax, and other plants. This allowed them to create lighter and more comfortable clothing. Clothing also played a social role. It could indicate a person's status in the tribe. For example, a chief could wear clothes decorated with fangs, claws, and feathers. This showed his strength and authority. Clothing could also indicate a person's profession. Hunters could wear clothes made of durable skins, while gatherers could wear lighter ones. In the end, clothes weren't just a way to survive, but also part of culture and social organization. They showed how developed a society was and how well it could adapt to its environment. Ancient people weren't just savages, but smart and inventive beings who could make clothes that helped them survive in the harshest conditions. We are used to thinking that ancient people were devoid of emotions and unable to express their feelings. However, this is not the case. Like us, they had all the same facial muscles that allowed them to smile, frown, and express surprise. Their facial expressions were the same as ours. They could laugh and cry, rejoice and grieve. Facial expressions were an important element of communication. In a society without writing, nonverbal communication played an important role. People could understand each other through facial expressions, even if they did not speak the same language. Emotions were an integral part of ancient human life. Fear helped them avoid danger, joy united the group after a successful hunt, and anger could be used to resolve conflicts. These emotions were the same as ours. They were embedded in us at the genetic level and helped us survive. For example, fear of a predator caused a person to run away or hide, which saved their life. In addition to universal emotions, there were also emotions specific to that time. For example, facial expressions during hunting or cooking were focused and serious. They showed that a person was completely immersed in the process and not distracted by trifles. This was important for survival, as the slightest mistake could lead to disaster. Facial expressions were an important element of communication. In a society where language was not yet developed, people used gestures and facial expressions to convey information. For example, raised eyebrows could mean surprise or a question, and pursed lips could mean dissatisfaction. These signals were universal and understood by all members of the tribe. They helped people interact with each other and solve common problems. Research shows that ancient people used facial expressions to express their feelings. They had the same facial muscles as we do, and they knew how to use them. They could smile when they were happy and cry when they were sad. They could express compassion for other members of the tribe and sympathy for the grief of others. This suggests that they were not just primitive beings, but developed individuals with complex inner worlds. All of this suggests that ancient people were just like us. They experienced the same emotions, had the same needs, and sought the same things: survival, safety, and happiness. Their appearance was merely a reflection of their adaptation to their environment, but their inner world was the same as ours. Now that we understand that ancient people were not so Stone Age, let's find out who was the coolest in their tribe. We will discuss this in the next chapter. As in modern society, ancient people had social stratification, and this was reflected in their appearance. Leaders and chiefs could have better quality clothing decorated with rare materials. They could wear necklaces made of shells, bones, or animal teeth. This was a way to show their status and authority. In addition, a person's appearance could vary depending on their profession. Hunters had a more muscular build, while gatherers were lighter. This was due to the fact that their work required different physical exertion. Social status was reflected not only in clothing, but also in jewelry. Necklaces made of rare shells, carved bones, and even the fangs of predators were not just decorations, but symbols of power and achievement. The more complex and exotic the materials, the higher the status of the person. For example, a necklace made of saber-toothed tiger teeth could only be worn by the strongest and most courageous hunter. It was a kind of ancient passport that immediately told you who you were dealing with. Shamans and medicine men could also have special status. Their appearance also differed from other members of the tribe. They could wear unusual headdresses made of feathers, and their clothes could be decorated with symbols that were believed to have magical powers. They were not just leaders, but spiritual mentors who could communicate with the other world. Their appearance reflected their special role in society. In addition, a person's appearance could vary depending on their gender. Women could wear more delicate jewelry and clothing, while men wore more massive and rough clothing. This was due to their different roles in society. Men were hunters and protectors, while women were gatherers and homemakers. However, this did not mean that women were less important. On the contrary, they played a key role in the tribe's survival. Appearance could also change with age. Older people usually had higher status and were respected. They could wear special jewelry that symbolized their wisdom and experience. Their appearance reflected their life journey and achievements. Thus, the appearance of ancient people was not just a coincidence, but a reflection of their social status, profession, and age. It was a kind of language that allowed people to understand each other without words. In a world without writing or documents, appearance was the only way to show who you were. Despite the lack of modern hygiene products, ancient people tried to keep their bodies clean. They used natural materials such as sand and clay to clean their skin. They washed in rivers and lakes and combed their hair regularly. They also used natural dyes to decorate their bodies. For example, they rubbed themselves with ochre. This was not only for beauty, but also for protection from the sun and insects. Hygiene was an important part of survival in the ancient world. In a world without medicine or antibiotics, cleanliness was essential for good health. Ancient people knew that dirt could cause disease, so they tried to keep themselves clean. They used natural remedies that were available to them. For example, sand and clay were used as abrasives to clean the skin. They removed dead skin cells and dirt, leaving the skin smooth and clean. Water was the main means of hygiene. People washed in rivers and lakes using leaves and herbs that had antiseptic properties. They could also use animal fat, which when mixed with ash, formed a primitive soap. This helped them clean their skin and hair. Hair care was part of the daily routine. Long hair could become tangled and get in the way, so it was combed regularly. Bones or wooden sticks could be used as combs. Hair could also be braided to keep it out of the way. Body decoration was not just for beauty, but also had practical significance. Natural dyes, such as ochre, were used to create designs on the body. This was a form of protection from the sun. Ochre reflected sunlight and protected the skin from burns. In addition, the designs on the body could scare away insects, which did not like the smell of the dye. All this suggests that ancient people were not so dirty after all. They understood the importance of hygiene and did everything possible to keep their bodies clean. They used natural remedies that were available to them and developed their own methods of hygiene. It was a kind of science that helped them survive in harsh conditions. Personal hygiene was not just a routine, but an important part of their culture. It helped people feel better and be more confident. It was a kind of ritual that was repeated every day. And although they did not have modern hygiene products, they found ways to keep their bodies clean. This shows that ancient people were not only intelligent, but also caring towards their bodies. The environment played an important role in shaping the appearance of ancient people. People who lived in forests were shorter and had shorter limbs to make it easier to move around in dense vegetation. Those who lived in the steppes were taller and more resilient. Climate also influenced appearance. People who lived in cold regions had wider noses and shorter limbs to retain heat. Those who lived in hot regions had narrower noses and longer limbs to release heat. Height and body type were directly related to habitat. People living in dense forests tended to be stockier and shorter. This allowed them to move more easily under the tree canopy and navigate through thickets. Their muscles were adapted to climbing in short bursts of speed necessary for hunting in the forest. In contrast, inhabitants of open spaces, such as the steppes, were tall and lean. This physique was ideal for running fast over long distances. It helped them pursue prey and escape predators in open terrain. The shape of the nose was also an important adaptation to the climate. Wide noses, characteristic of inhabitants of cold regions, helped warm the air before it entered the lungs. This prevented the body from becoming hypothermic. Narrow noses, on the other hand, were common among inhabitants of hot and humid regions. They helped evaporate moisture, cooling the body, which was important in high temperatures. Skin and hair color were also linked to climate. In northern regions, skin was lighter to get more vitamin D. In southern regions, it was darker to protect against ultraviolet radiation. All these changes happened over thousands of years and were the result of natural selection. Thus, the appearance of ancient humans was not accidental, but a reflection of their adaptation to their environment. They were ideal creatures for their time and place. The image of ancient people that we see in movies is shaped not by scientific data, but by stereotypes. Artists and filmmakers often aim to make the image more dramatic and memorable rather than accurate. For example, they may depict them with hunched backs to emphasize their primitiveness, or with heavy jaws to show their strength. However, this has nothing to do with reality. Ancient people were just as intelligent and inventive as we are, and their appearance was merely a reflection of their adaptation to their environment. The cinematic image of ancient people is far from the truth. It is based on outdated ideas and stereotypes. Directors and artists often use exaggerated features to make characters more recognizable and dramatic. For example, Neanderthals are often depicted with hunched backs, although modern research shows that they walked upright. Their heavy jaws and protruding brow ridges are also exaggerated to emphasize their wildness. These stereotypes have become ingrained in people's minds and part of popular culture. However, they have nothing to do with reality. Ancient people were just like us. They had their emotions, their fears, and their joys. Their appearance was merely a reflection of their adaptation to their environment, not a sign of their primitiveness. In fact, they were very intelligent and inventive beings who were able to survive in the harshest conditions. Thus, cinema and popular culture have created a myth about ancient people. This myth is convenient and easy to accept, but it is far from the truth. We have examined what ancient humans actually looked like and have seen that their appearance was much more complex and diverse than what we see in movies. They were not just savages, but intelligent and inventive creatures who were able to adapt to the harshest conditions. Which of the described features of ancient people's appearance do you think was the most important for their survival? Write your thoughts in the comments. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. See you next time.